morning. I know that folks are still eating. That's the plan. I know folks are still getting food, and that's the plan too. So if you didn't get enough the first go around, there's plenty of breakfast left. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to our first ever Rooster Booster. We are all about networking and getting to know folks that we're doing business with in our community. And this is our new attempt at networking before we go to work. And hopefully this will get your day started off in great fashion. For those of you who don't know, my name is Amy Cloud. I am the CEO of the Jessamine County Chamber of Commerce here in Nicholasville, and I'm excited that you all have chosen to join us today. To get us started on our program, I'm proud to introduce the president of the Board of Directors of the Jessamine County Chamber, our own county attorney, Brian Gettle.
Thank you. This is a great turnout. I'm very excited to do this. The Rooster Booster Breakfast is an idea of our new CEO, Amy Cloud. And Amy, great idea, great opportunity to do so, to be here this morning. I want to thank Delta Gas. Delta Gas is the first sponsor of the Rooster Booster Breakfast. And I've told them this morning you've set the bar real high for the next one who's going to sponsor our next Rooster Booster. It is, like I said, great to be here. One of the things that I want to do, this is the first time that the Chamber has actually gathered together since the passing of our dear friend, Rick Corman. And he was just a tremendous, tremendous asset to Jessamine County in ways that I don't even think all of us will be able to fully comprehend. I kind of thought of him as our security blanket here in the county, and he made us look really good. And as you know, he passed last Thursday. And so if you would just take a moment of silence to remember him and his family and say some prayers for them, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. We have two distinguished guests with us this morning, and I asked, how do they want to be introduced to their staff members? And in true character, they said, let's do just informal. And that's really what one of the best things that I can say about both of these gentlemen, both of our congressmen, is that they are informal. You can approach them and talk to them about anything. They make you feel like you're important. They make you feel like you're a friend of theirs. I first met our first speaker, Congressman Guthrie, a couple of years ago, and that's what immediately struck me about him. Knew his resume, knew what an incredible background he had and how qualified he was to be a congressman, but he was just so approachable and so easy to talk to and engaged you in such a great way. So it is a privilege for us and a pleasure and an honor for us to have Congressman Brett Guthrie. He's going to speak for 10 minutes. Then we'll have Congressman Barr speak for 10 minutes, and then they'll stand up here together and take your questions. So, Congressman Guthrie.
Thank you. Good thing about following Brian, you have to readjust the microphone. I appreciate it very much. And thanks for having me here. It's great to be here. Of course, I live on Central Time, so this is really early for me. And somebody's already said, you look really sleepy. But I'm not as sleepy as I look, I guess. But it's always great to see bright, shining faces. And Rick Corman, I used to be the transportation chairman when I was in the state Senate. So I got to deal with him a lot. And I remember the first time I met him, said Rick Corman, who owns Corman Railroad, is going to come visit. Well, he came in the red blazer with the tie and I thought he was dressed like I thought he was like the conductor or something when he first walked up. And you learn really quick. You're talking about a humble man who built a great enterprise. And you can't drive around Jessamine County without just seeing what he did and what's part of just everywhere. I remember Tom Buford and I working with him on some specific things, so it's really good to do. And so Tom's been a dear friend of mine, and I know Kim King's here. And she's, if you don't know her, you'll get to know her because I think we share most of our districts overlap in Jessamine County for the most part. You don't have High Bridge, so you don't have to cross the bridge. You have to walk across the bridge to say you're local. You might not want to when you see it. But It's great to be here, and we were home in August, as Andy and I are here today, and it's great to be, redistricting's all settled now. I know the Congress was last year, but the state has done it, so we're here, and it's great to have this part of this great state. I know we're having a conflict of my districts. I live in Bowling Green, so Saturday night, hopefully you guys all come to Nashville. It'll be a great game. Either wear blue or Hilltop or red. You can wear either one and just come and be part of a great Kentucky tradition that's begun over the last couple of years. But we've been home, and I've actually been doing town halls. That's been my kind of agenda. I say I've gone to, and I have to say this, I have 21 counties, so I go into every county seat, except for one. I went to Wilmore instead of Nicholasville, Judge, because I don't have Nicholasville, I have Wilmore, and Mayor let us visit down there. And just open it up, open the floor to what people want to talk about, and what you sense when you're there, or what you don't sense, what you hear, is that people are kind of frustrated with what's happening in Washington, D.C., kind of the idea that things aren't getting solved. They're big issues that aren't getting solved. And when we go back in September, there are still big issues on the floor to get solved, and it's all been kind of pushed to a deadline that's September 30th, and then a debt limit deadline that's sometime in October. And it's frustrating because I think I like to get stuff done. We know we got to solve it. Let's just sit down and work and get it done. So when we get back in September, a couple of big things we're facing is one is the House passes spending bills, but the Senate hasn't passed any spending bills. There's typically 12 spending bills that fund the government, so there's none. So we're facing a continuing resolution, and if we pass nothing, then on September 30th, the government will shut down, which hasn't happened since in the 1990s, and then they'd already passed 10 spending bills. So only 2 spending bills of the government hadn't shut down, and one of the spending bills that had passed is the military. So, that's one of the leverages the House has. All spending bills originate in the House of Representatives. That's kind of the leverage that we can use to get big things done that we need to get done. And one thing we're trying to work is how do we reform, change, stop, whatever, the health care bill. I know a lot of this is Chamber of Commerce, your businesses, and we need to reform health care in our country. I'm not dismissing that. But we had a hearing in Lexington yesterday, and some was in the paper today, and there are businesses who came, and we had a guy from a pizza shop, guy from a car dealership, guy from a big manufacturer, and they're making decisions about hiring, growing, or not making decisions because of the uncertainty with the health care bill. And it's not that, and I had a guy last night in Mercer County that provides health insurance to his employees. He says, I've learned that if I renew before January 1st, it's going to go up 10%. If I renew after January 1st, it's going up 85%. Because you can't just say, here's an insurance plan, this is what I can afford to provide you, let's kind of share costs together. You have to give a Cadillac plan now. It's called minimum essential benefits. And so I said, well, you realize you can do it now, but next year it's going to cost you that. And so that's only giving you a 1-year reprieve. So what I think we should do, there's a movement to defund, which means the bill still stays in place for the taxes and some of the other policies in place. I like to see the whole thing, because the defund's for a year, because the spending bill's for a year, is see the whole thing delayed. We've already delayed the employer mandate, and a lot of other things have been delayed or waived or pushed over. Let's just delay the whole thing, is my opinion. Let's rewrite a bill that truly gets to the problem of the healthcare system is the rising costs. The rising costs. And so that's going to be a big push when we get back in September. The other is the debt limit. And I want to make sure the debt limit, in the most conservative budget that has passed, at least out of one body, is the House, and it balances in 10 years. We borrow 43 cents out of every dollar today. So if we do no debt limit in October or November, depending on when there's a set number, and we've already passed the set number that we borrow, so we're not borrowing any money right now, actually, and we're paying out of cash flow. But you get to a point where there's no more cash in the bank when you're spending more than's coming in. And that's going to be, so you don't know the actual date. Probably the Social Security checks in October will probably be the date. They're now saying we thought it'd be November, but it may be earlier. But we're borrowing 43 cents out of every dollar. So to do nothing in October means you would have to cut 43% of the budget. And most of them, 60% of the budget's in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other kind of programs like that. So to say you're not going to do anything means you're going to have to leave Social Security and Medicare on the table for current retirees. And that's something we don't want to do. What we want to do, So if you pass even the most conservative budget that's passed, it's a 10-year balance. You've got to do something with the debt limit. But I don't want to raise a debt limit without a spending plan that shows how we get back to fiscal sanity. And the president says there's no negotiation over the debt limit, just I need a carte blanche debt limit to spend. And we're saying no. This is a point where we have to use the leverage we have in the House to say we've got to get our fiscal spending in order. And we're not even asking anything radical. We grandfather everybody 55 or older in the current Medicare, living up to the promises that were made by politicians who had no idea how to pay for them. And so nobody here looks to be over 55. I think Steve Miller is, I know. But if you are, you're exempt from any changes in Medicare. If we follow the current pathway of Medicare, not only does the debt continue to grow, but it goes bankrupt in 2023 anyway. And those are if you use the president's numbers. And so we have to reform the system. And we need to get a big start. We tried last year with the super committee of the last debt limit. We didn't get anything out of the super committee to reform. We did get sequestration, which actually cuts. It doesn't cut the overall growth of government because I'm a baby boomer. We're all retiring. I'm 49. I'm the end of it. When I get to be 65, 21 million of us, more of us will be on Medicare and Medicaid. Because 80% of retirees, Medicaid's 80% spent on people that are elderly. And so to say that, so why do you have to work on these programs? And I'll close and get Andy here. In 30 years, if these programs go as their demographic, if we don't change anything, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid will be 100% of federal revenue. 100% of our taxes will go to 3 programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. 80% of Medicaid's on the elderly. My daughter will be my age in 30 years. I'm 30 years older than she is. So what I'm telling my daughter's generation, if we don't fix this, my generation, the baby boomers, are saying when you wake up and go to work every day, you need to go pay your taxes so we can be retired. My grandparents gave my parents and my parents gave me a better future than they had. And it's our obligation and what we're going to fight for this September. I don't like petty political bickering. That frustrates me. It frustrates the people. It frustrates everything. But James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, if you go through history, argue with each other over big things. And getting our country in fiscal sanity so our kids will have a future is a big thing. And it's something we are willing to work towards and want to join hands. The problem, the Senate budget doesn't balance anywhere in the future, doesn't even pretend to balance. The president's budget doesn't balance. So you can't say, well, let's just split the difference, because you can't split 10 years with infinity. It doesn't work. And so they're going to have to come to the table and say, we're willing to solve these programs. Like I said, if we don't, our children won't have a future. And I know the thing that's made us the greatest country on earth in a very short time, if you look at world history, is people have always worked hard and put up so their kids could have a better life and created wealth like the world couldn't imagine when our founding fathers put together the Constitution 226 years ago. So thank you, and I'm going to answer questions as soon as we get to hear from our next. You get to have 2 congressmen, so I don't know if that's a good thing of you having me, but it's certainly a great thing having Andy Barr, and I'll turn it back to Brian.
One of the things to be an effective MC is to make notes so you don't forget stuff, and I'm telling you that because I didn't make notes and I forgot a few housekeeping things. One of the things that I should have done right away is introduce our elected officials that are with us here this morning, and you all know most of them, but I want to do that because it's important as a chamber to be a mixer of business and government. And so we have with us, first of all, our Judge Executive Neil Cassidy. Sitting up here as well, Magistrate Tim Vaughn. Got another magistrate, George Dean. State Senator Tom Buford. Wilmore Mayor Harold Rainwater. And State Representative Bob Dameron. Bob, good to be here. And State Representative Kim King coming over from Harrisburg this morning. She's got part of Wilmore. And that leads me into a promotion. We're taking a leaders trip to Murray at the middle of October. A lot of our elected officials are going. We want to have our business people going as well. This is going to be a great opportunity for us to interact together on a very casual basis, and then go to Murray. Murray's got a lot of great things going on. They just got a couple of, and they brought in a couple of manufacturing plants. 2 German auto manufacturing have moved into their industrial park, and they are not located on interstate. So we've got a lot to learn from Murray. It's going to be a great trip, so get signed up for that as well. So that takes care of the rest of my list that I didn't write down. Our next speaker, I met him about 5 years ago, and one story I want to tell about him involves me, obviously, in that his first campaign, he actually asked me to ride on his campaign bus for some of his campaign stops, which was a great thrill for me. But I don't think that will ever happen again because he lost that election. And so the next cycle, I didn't get invited anyone. So I think my days of traveling on campaign buses are over. But Andy is also somebody with an incredible resume, well qualified to be in Congress. Very approachable, just like Congressman Guthrie. He's already made a splash with the House Banking Committee. He is working for our community banks, and you all remember the community banks. They're the ones that didn't cause the financial meltdown, haven't taken hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer money to keep themselves going, and are still being crushed by federal regulations. So Andy is working on that for our community bankers, who are a big part of especially the local chambers here. So without further ado, Congressman Andy Barr.
Well, Brian, just for the record, anytime you want to come on the campaign bus, you're welcome. We won Jessamine County both times, so it wasn't Brian's fault, let me tell you. Probably had more to do with the candidate than anything else. But I wanted to winning and losing. You know, you learn a lot. And that first campaign really was a good learning experience for us, and gave us a chance to get to know a lot of people, and that's important. If you want to represent the people, you got to go out and mix with them and listen to them, and that's what we've been trying to do. But Amy, thanks. Brian, thanks for your leadership in the chamber. Thanks to all of you, our elected officials who are here, for your service, and for the business community here in Jessamine County for doing what you do. You're really kind of the unsung heroes of the community. You're the leaders. You're the employers. You're the people who sign the payroll. And you work very, very hard to provide not only a living and a better future for your family and for your kids, but you're providing opportunity for your neighbors. And that is a heroic thing, and it's often underappreciated. So thanks for what you all do. I see a lot of great friends in the room here today, and Congressman Guthrie did a great job talking about the budget battles that we face in Washington right now. I know Regina Crawford's here representing Leader McConnell, and he's doing a great job for us on the other side of the Capitol building, fighting for fiscal sanity on that side, and we really appreciate his leadership as well. But I won't belabor the points that Congressman Guthrie made, because I think he did a good job laying out the challenges facing our country. I would just say this in echoing what Congressman Guthrie said, and I agree with all of it, and that is that the challenges are huge. The 30-year number that he cited is accurate, but to put an exclamation point on Congressman Guthrie's statement, 30 years is when 100% of the budget will be, or 100% of the revenue will be consumed by those 3 mandatory spending programs. But it's only 12 years, about 2025, when 100% of all revenue will be consumed by Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt. So we're looking at a situation that if we don't take on these challenges, if we don't impose some spending restraint in Washington, we will have no money to spend on all of the domestic discretionary priorities that you and I believe government should be doing. roads, bridges, transportation infrastructure, national security, homeland security, the FBI, the Federal Aviation Administration, the National Institutes of Health, education, to the extent you believe the federal government has any role in education. All of these things that many of us, on a bipartisan basis, believe should be the job of government, we won't be able to do any of it without borrowing that money from China. Now, to reiterate what Congressman Guthrie said, we're all in this because we want to make a better future for our kids and our grandkids. And it is unfair for my two daughters and for your kids and your grandkids to continue to saddle future generations of this kind of debt. It is not right. There is a moral dimension to this. So we do need to restrain spending. We need to cut spending. I think Congressman Guthrie went over that, and I think he gave you a great synopsis of what's coming down the pike in terms of the budget battles in Washington. But what I thought I might do for the balance of my time is talk about some of the other issues that we're working on in Washington, and that is getting the economy going again. Because there's a nexus, there's a connection between economic growth and solving our deficit challenges. Yes, we need to restrain spending. Yes, we need to reform our mandatory spending programs to make sure government keeps its promises to our retirees and future retirees. Yes, we need to reform the bureaucracy in so many ways. But we also need to promote pro-growth policies that get the American people back to work. And that's what the Chamber of Commerce is all about, entrepreneurship, creating a better future. And when we reflect upon the life and the success of great entrepreneurs like Rick Corman, a hero to this community and the broader Kentucky family, we think about the heroism of the entrepreneur. This is what made America great. Guys like Rick Corman, who really are self-made entrepreneurs, they create wealth not just for themselves and for selfishness. Look at the life of Rick Corman, one of the most generous men that lived among us. He used his wealth to create opportunity for his employees. He used his wealth and his success to create great things, innovate, provide economic opportunities through his railroad company. And he used his success for charitable purposes as well. He was a great citizen of this community and of this Commonwealth. We need more of that so that we can grow our economy and give our kids and grandkids a future. And as we get our economy going again, and as there are more taxpayers, guess what? Our deficit challenges become all the easier because we have more productivity, we have more taxpayers, we have higher revenue, not because of higher taxes, not because of more government, but because of greater economic growth, because of higher income and higher paychecks and therefore higher revenue through dynamism of the economy. As someone indicated, I serve on the Financial Services Committee. I think Brian mentioned that. You've probably read about that in the New York Times and the Herald Leader as well. They don't get it quite right. But I do serve on that committee, and I sought out a position on that committee because as I listened throughout those two campaigns to the people of Central and Eastern Kentucky, what I heard was that our small community financial institutions, the credit unions, the community banks, the small banks, even the regional banks that serve their communities as community banks in this area, they are getting crushed under the weight of the Dodd-Frank Act. And so it is the regulatory uncertainty in the financial services sector, in the healthcare sector with Obamacare, and also in the energy sector with the war on coal that is really preventing economic recovery. And on the Financial Services Committee, I have an opportunity to work on public policy issues that really have a chance to be helpful to the community banks and the small financial institutions and their customers right here in Central and Eastern Kentucky. So it's a great opportunity to really be part of pro-growth policies and getting the economy back on track. And the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Ben Bernanke, testifies in front of our committee on a semi-annual basis. And the last time he came was in July, and it may have been his last appearance before our committee before he steps down from that position. But I had an opportunity to ask him a couple of questions. And the main question that I asked him was, you know, the Federal Reserve has engaged on this quantitative easing program, this massive bond buying program, $85 billion in bond purchases every single month. It's an extraordinary and unprecedented stimulative, accommodative monetary policy, the likes we've never seen in the history of our country. The Fed's balance sheet has tripled to $3.5 trillion. The monetary policy, the bond buying program continues unabated. And really, we don't know when the tapering process will begin, when they'll start to unravel this. And yet, despite the extraordinary and unprecedented monetary policies implemented by the Federal Reserve, we still look at the economic indicators facing our country, and we see the weakest economic recovery in history since the Great Depression. 7.4% unemployment, but that's really understating the problem in the labor market because the long-term unemployment is higher. Jobs that are being created, the vast majority of them are part-time jobs. We heard a lot about this yesterday in our Obamacare field hearing that Congressman Guthrie and I participated in with Congressman Phil Rowe and Congressman Yarmouth. We see a persistent lagging high unemployment and underemployment. We see 5 consecutive years of declining wages. We see 58% of the eligible workforce, the working age population, actually having jobs, which is 5% lower than the pre-recession average. Think about that. Only 58% of working age people between 18 and 64 years old actually have jobs. We have a productivity problem in this country. The long-term unemployed, the frustrated workforce, really is a dynamic that we haven't seen in our country's history before. And 3/4 of the American people are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, that is disgraceful. That is a real economic problem facing our country. So the question that I asked Ben Bernanke was, despite all of the extraordinary efforts you're taking, despite the stimulative, accommodative policies, despite quantitative easing 1, 2, and 3, the American working family deserves to know, what is the cause of our persistent weakness in the labor market in this country? And I think the answer is pretty simple. Because when you look at these economic indicators, the long-term unemployment problems that we have, that has persisted at the same exact time that government has exploded in Washington, D.C. We've seen massive increases in the bureaucracy. It's happened at the same time as Dodd-Frank, the same time as Obamacare, the same time that the EPA has waged an unrelenting war on Kentucky and other coal-producing states in the war on coal. And so what I see is uncertainty created in the private sector by a literal avalanche of red tape and a growth, an explosion of the administrative state in Washington. You know, they say that Washington, D.C. is 68 square miles surrounded by reality. And that's really true. There's no common sense, and I think Congressman Guthrie could attest to this. There's no common sense in Washington. I'll give you an example. The Dodd-Frank law is a 2,300-page monstrosity. It doesn't do anything to fix what actually caused the financial crisis. It doesn't address Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac at all. But what it does do is unleash thousands of federal regulators and bureaucrats to harass job creators and our small community banks who are being crushed under the weight of the regulations. 400 new rules and regulations. The regulators have promulgated a little over 200 of those, a little over half of those regulations, and the cost of compliance of just those regulations is 24 million hours a year. To put that in perspective, it took 20 million hours to build the Panama Canal. So we have a real issue in this country of a lack of common sense, and we're not solving the problems that actually caused the financial crisis, but instead we're making matters worse. And so I've introduced a couple of pieces of legislation criticized for helping Wall Street, when in fact, if the news reporters would actually do a little homework, they would realize this is not at all what these bills do. What they do is provide needed regulatory relief for our small community banks, make sure that there's access to mortgage credit for responsible, creditworthy borrowers, and also get federal bureaucrats out of the way. The Portfolio Lending and Mortgage Access Act was legislation that was recommended to us not as the Herald Leader would say or the New York Times would say by Wall Street, but instead by the top banking regulator of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, Charles Weiss, who came before the Financial Services Committee and testified that small community banks needed relief from the qualified mortgage rule. And so what we say in our bill is, if a small community bank originates a mortgage and holds it on portfolio, retains the risk instead of selling it into the secondary market, encouraging the subprime churning that we saw in the run-up to the financial crisis, if they hold it on the books, they should be provided regulatory relief. That's the legislation I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for Kentucky, not Wall Street. And no matter what the New York Times says, that's what the bill actually does. In terms of the credit unions, as long as credit unions act like credit unions and not banks, as long as their legislative priority to raise their loan limits is not increased, then I'll fight to maintain their tax-exempt status. That's why I want to fight to retain their tax-exempt status, because if they operate as credit unions and not as banks, that tax exemption remains appropriate. Two final stories to kind of give you kind of an exclamation point on the fact that Washington is out of touch. We had a hearing before the Financial Services Committee about the onerous qualified mortgage rule and how that's restricting access to mortgage credit for responsible homeowners. And we know that the elimination of Fannie and Freddie will make for a more sustainable home finance system for homeowners and taxpayers. But what we also know is that the qualified mortgage rule is restricting access to credit for qualified borrowers, qualified mortgage and homeowners, and it's really hurting the economic recovery. And even though the housing market is recovering, this is an important reform that we need to implement. Well, in rural America, the idea that the regulators have set forth is that there should be a little bit more expanded access to mortgage credit because of the particular economic distress in rural places. And so what they said was that if you're a non-rural county, you've got more restrictive lending requirements. But if you're a rural county, they open up the qualified mortgage box a little bit for you. I put up a slide on the screen in the House Financial Services Committee, and I had Charles Weiss, the commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Financial Institutions, comment on this. The yellow counties were the counties that the federal government said were non-rural. The blue counties were the rural counties. And one of the yellow counties was Bath County, Kentucky. And I asked the commissioner, who lives in Winchester right down the road from Bath County, I said, Commissioner Weiss, you're the top banking regulator in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Can you look at this map and look at Bath County and you see it's classified by the federal government as non-rural? Can you tell all of the congressmen and congresswomen, can you tell all the lobbyists and the special interest groups, and can you especially tell all of the regulators and the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., what you think about their classification as Bath County as non-rural? And the top banking regulator of Kentucky appropriately said, Bath County is one of the most rural places in all America. This is an example of why the regulators have no clue what they're doing in Washington, D.C., and why we need to rein them in. And so Congressman Guthrie and I supported the REINS Act, which would impose a requirement that Congress approve costly rules and regulations. And I'll end my comments with this, and then we'll take whatever questions you have. This has a human dimension to it. This has a real impact on human lives. The war on coal is real. The regulators are killing jobs, 5,700 coal mining jobs in eastern Kentucky in the last 2 years alone. The president's top science advisor says a war on coal is exactly what we need. 2-3 weeks ago, I was in Wolfe County, Kentucky. Now, there's no coal mining operations active right now in Wolfe County that I know of, but there's a lot of coal miners who are laid off who live in Wolfe County and used to commute to their mines a few counties over. And as I finished one of my town hall meetings in Wolfe County a couple weeks ago, a young lady approached me with tears welling up in her eyes. And she said, it's time to go back to school, but my husband was laid off by his coal company. He's a coal miner, and he was laid off because they couldn't get a permit. And they've been looking for a permit for years and years and years, and they told him that they were trying to get a permit. But they had no choice. They had to lay him off. It was time to go back to school, and this young lady said, I want to buy my kids new tennis shoes to go to school, but we can't afford it because the government has put my husband out of work. And so I had to go buy flip-flops for my children. Now let me tell you, that is a disgrace. It is outrageous that the federal government and bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. would put working families in Kentucky in that position. So Congressman Guthrie and I are committed to fighting the lack of common sense inside the Beltway, fighting the regulators, fighting the bureaucrats, because as we seek to solve our debt and deficit challenges, we need to get our economy going again. We need to liberate the free enterprise system. We need more Rick Cormans, not less. Thank you very much.
Any of you have to leave for work, feel free to do that now. The congressman will take questions, and then they'll probably do that till about 9 o'clock or so. And then if you want to stick around, I think they'll be here a little bit longer for some personal interaction. So who's got the first question for Congressman Guthrie?
Oh, let me get a mic to you.
I know Donna does not need a mic.
For the video, you do.
I gotta have my glasses.
She has a whole paper.
I will let you know that I fought this early this morning at 5:30, so, if it's not right, just overlook it. My first question is the EPA, and you just talked about that, the coal and the oil. When will someone fix this problem? Because coal from Kentucky will go to China, and oil from Canada will go to China, and the EPA does not help the world environment. So, we're going to have coal and we're going to have oil, but it's all going to be shipped out of our state. Let me give you my other one and you can do it. And the other one was the balanced budget. And, we need an amendment for this. And we borrow each year and we never pay back any principal, only interest. And it can't last forever. And that's my second question. The other one is of course the government's too big, and this is the Obamacare. And if we fund this thing, once it's started, it never ends. It'll keep going, and things will get worse. So I want to thank you both for standing up for us on this particular thing. And this can't last forever, and then the country will finally fail. Thank you both for standing up for us.
Thanks. Let me go first, and I mentioned Kim and Tom when I was talking. I didn't see Bob had walked in, so I apologize for that because I enjoyed working with Bob when I was in Frankfurt, and we got a lot of stuff done, so appreciate it. And, the big thing that somebody asked me yesterday in a town hall meeting, so at 15, I got 6 more to go, and he said, how do we get manufacturing back in America? He said Kentucky, but America particularly, and that's, my dad worked for Ford, so my pathway to the middle class for my life was right through the factory floor, and that's just not a saying, that's absolutely true. And I think energy, and so I'll hit the energy side of what you said. Energy is the thing. We have the coal. If we get the coal out of the ground and get it permitted, we're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. That's been discovered just recently in western New York, western Pennsylvania, and into a little bit of Kentucky. I wish it was more here, but it's maybe we'll continue to find it. And the other is the Keystone Pipeline, as you talked about, oil from Canada. But it's not just in Canada. It's also in North Dakota. And North Dakota has almost no unemployment because they're trying to get people to come there to work. But still, they're not getting it permitted at the level. And it's through new technology. Entrepreneurs figured out how to horizontal drill or how to frack and things to move forward. And if we could, we've been talking about energy independence since Jimmy Carter, if you remember. And it's always been something out there everybody talks about. But we actually have the energy resources to do it if we can get it permitted to move forward. And I can tell you Hal Rogers, who represents Eastern Kentucky, this is a depression in Eastern Kentucky. I know Bob's on the budget committee, I think, still, aren't you? And you can see what coal severance has done because of what's going on. So it doesn't just affect people working in the coal fields. It affects people who get their electricity through coal, which 93% of Kentuckians do, and it affects the state budget because of the lack of resources coming through. As you talked about, the more people working, the more you pay in. And so what we try to do, we passed a bill out of the House of Representatives to do the Keystone Pipeline without the president having to approve it. Since it crosses international borders, it has to be approved through the State Department, which was recommended to be approved, and the president has to sign off on it, and it hasn't. And it's a fact that tar sands oil in Alberta, Canada, burns not as clean as sweet crude from Saudi Arabia. That's a fact. But Canada is not going to leave it into the ground if we don't ship it to Baton Rouge, or actually goes to Houston if we connect it all together. It's going to go to Vancouver to China, as you said. That's what they've said that. Stephen Harper, their prime minister, has said that. So we are in a real struggle with the administration, with their EPA, in trying to draft language and bills which can't get through the Senate, not because of our two senators, get through the Senate because to unleash this potential, because that's our competitive advantage as a country, is our energy ability. And, there are a lot of people, and just to be, and I've never been overly political dogmatic, but there are a lot of people in the EPA administration that really believe that it's solar and philosophically we need to be solar and wind. There's just not enough there's not a technology that delivers wind and solar power at an economically price at the scale we need to grow our economy and continue to manufacture. And the problem, I've had people say, well, just get rid of the EPA and like funding bills. But you want to make sure you have a clean country. You just want to be reasonable about it. And so when you put into the thing, the EPA has the responsibility of ensure coal mines, because you want, once they take the coal out of the ground, to go back into normal. You want them to replace and replenish. So an example of this, they'll give permits. But what they'll say is they'll come up with there's an alkali, or with what the streams must be. I can't think of the actual term, but it's something like alkali. And the permit says it has to be cleaner than it is in nature. That's the standard they put. So then we got to go back and say, okay, you can't do one that makes this cleaner than nature. So that's the kind of stuff you struggle. Every time you put something, they find some reason to go around in a loophole to prevent it. As they said, it's a philosophical core to the people in the EPA to not have coal. And I went on longer, but you want to hit some of the others on that.
Great points. I just say that Congressman Guthrie and I have voted for the RAINS Act. We voted for legislation to authorize the northern route of the Keystone Pipeline. We have both voted for legislation to end President Obama's moratorium on offshore drilling. You're right. Someone's going to use that Canadian oil, and if we don't access that pipeline, if we don't approve that pipeline, it's going to China. This is, again, it's about common sense. The EPA wants to categorize fly ash, coal ash, as hazardous waste. Hazardous waste is that fly ash is not hazardous waste. It's been used for decades as recyclable material to help in construction and road building. The concrete that makes up the headquarters of the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. is made with coal fly ash. So according to the EPA bureaucrats in Washington, they are working in a building surrounded by hazardous waste that they want to regulate.
Yeah, I would say the EPA is a toxic waste dump. Next question.
Gentlemen, I'm Jackie Bruner, and Obamacare, you talk about getting the economy going again. If Obamacare goes through, you're going to see the highest unemployment rate that this country's ever seen. And yesterday, y'all spoke with a friend of mine, Joe Bologna. Everybody knows Joe's restaurant. I talked with Joe about 6 months ago. He told me what he was going to do, cut back on his employees due to Obamacare. At one time, Joe entertained opening up another restaurant over on Richmond Road. That would have been a potential of another 50 employees. He's not going to do that now. He's having to cut back. He's having to quit the 40-hour work week. Joe is just a little guy. You just wait, if this thing goes through, what this country's going to see. And everybody needs health care, but it don't need to be done this way. Thank you.
Well, you're right. And the issue is when we debated, I was there when they debated the health care bill on the floor, and it was the health care law now. And the argument was there were 40 million uninsured. And if you like what you have, you can keep it. And so what's happened now, the Congressional Budget Office, which is the nonpartisan, it's kind of like the LRC, it's just not a partisan staff, the guys who legislature, have come back and said, at the end of this, there's going to be 30 million uninsured. And so for 10 million people, which we want 10 million people to have health insurance, it's changed the health insurance market for everybody. And the issues like the Joe Bolognas of the world can't come down and say, look, I'm a small business guy, I'm selling food, I want good employees, let's come up with a deal where you have a high deductible, I'll put in an HSA, we can work out these kind of plans. What a lot of small businesses do that want to provide health insurance, and they just can't, they're not allowed to do it anymore in this. You have to have a minimum essential benefit plan that's going to just price him out of the market. So he's actually closed. You can't go to Bologna's on, I don't know if he calls Joe's, or you can't go on Monday now. He closed on Monday to keep people under the 40 hour. And what was happening in the meeting yesterday, there were some people that came in from Louisville. They weren't from Lexington, they were from Louisville, and they were kind of being disruptive. And so whenever they were talking, Joe and those guys were talking, they kept saying, I heard them holler, greed, greed, greed. And I can tell you, the business guys I talk to, particularly small business that are locally owned, those guys are distressed over what's happening and what it does to their employees. They're not saying, well, I can't have more in my pocket. They're saying, and I have one guy just almost in tears who's in retail, very competitive retail market, and he said, I'm not going to make my employees go to 29 hours. I'm just not going to do that. And I'm just going to have to close my business because I'm not willing to do that. You know, then if he closes his business, they all lose their jobs too. So these employers are actually just stressed, not about what it's going to do to their business, but what it also does to the employees that the law's trying to do something for, and it's actually counterproductive.
I would agree, and it's really a shame to see entrepreneurs like Joe Bees, who really has provided great jobs and benefits for his employees, having to scale back. And I know I said this yesterday in the hearing, I think this is a bipartisan sentiment that we're all going to miss those garlic breadsticks on Monday. But let me just say something else about the Obamacare law that I discovered when I got to Washington that really was distressing also. Not only are they putting small businesses and entrepreneurs out of work and scaling back hours for workers and moving us from a full-time work economy to a part-time low-wage economy. But the other problem is the political class in Washington feels entitled. And there's a culture, there's a cancer in Washington. And the people who wrote the Obamacare law, the committee staffers, the leadership staffers, the staff that works for Nancy Pelosi, they specifically carved out an exception for them in Obamacare when they wrote the law. And when I discovered this, I introduced a simple bill. And the bill is called the Live by the Laws You Write Act. And it says that if Obamacare is good enough for the American people, it's good enough for members of Congress and their staff who wrote the law. Abraham Lincoln said, the best way to repeal a law is to enforce it strictly.
I appreciate you both taking some time and being here today. It's very popular to discuss how terrible the budget is and how it needs to be balanced and all these ways to promote growth, yet it's very unpopular to talk about what needs to be cut. And please don't tell me that tax breaks for private jets, because it's just not, it's nothing compared to what we need to cut. If my family doesn't live by a budget, we have to make sacrifices. We have to cut expenses. You have to make somebody angry. And politicians refuse to decide or to voice who they are going to upset in this process. And ultimately that's going to happen. So what is your thought? What areas are going to meaningfully be cut in order for us to solve this problem?
I'll go first. That's the good question. That's the question that needs to be asked in every town hall in America, because that's the real question. I mean, that's a tough question, and it's a good question. The first thing we've got to do is we've got to set priorities. We've got to set what is the priority of the American people? That's what budgets are all about. Budgets are about setting priorities and living within those budgets. American hardworking families do that every year. They sacrifice their vacation. They don't buy the car or whatever. Well, the majority of the American people oppose Obamacare. The majority of Americans say this is a train wreck, they don't want it. Administration officials are now admitting that key features of the law are unworkable. There is a connection between the deficit and our long-term debt and this new government-run entitlement program. We've got a $35 trillion unfunded liability in Medicare and Social Security right now, and we're about ready to embark on an entitlement program that will cost $1.8 trillion to the American taxpayer over the next 10 years. The first year cost in 2014 is actually modest compared to that number. It's $48 billion. That's a lot of money, though, $48 billion. So Congressman Guthrie's right. If we delay that for a year, that saves us $48 billion right off the bat. And as we head down to this road in September, when we look at the continuing resolution, what I say is, let's fund the government. Let's not shut down the government, but let's fund the priorities. And Obamacare is not a priority. Obamacare is a low priority. It is destroying our economy. It's hurting patients. It's putting bureaucrats in charge of the doctor-patient relationship, and it's going to waste taxpayer dollars, $48 billion. We can save $1.8 trillion by not going into Obamacare in the first place. But that's not the total solution, as you know. That just exacerbated the problem. The truth is, as we said before, that the mandatory spending as part of our budget is increasingly crowding out all of our other priorities. If any politician tells you that we can solve our budget deficit problems by raising taxes or by cutting or sequester or cutting domestic discretionary programs or cutting the military, they're lying to you. The only way we solve this problem and we save this country from bankruptcy is if we reform our mandatory spending problems, reduce the debt, and reduce our debt service obligations every year. Now, does that mean cutting benefits for current seniors? No, it doesn't right now. But every year that we wait, you know, we both voted for the Paul Ryan budget, okay, which we've both been criticized for, okay? And that budget says that if you're 55 or older, nothing changes. If you're 54 or younger, we have to be realistic, and we're going to change the way Medicare operates. We're going to change the way Social Security operates potentially, although that's not part of that particular budget proposal. We can make these changes fairly to make sure that the government keeps its promises to current seniors and save these programs for future beneficiaries. But every day that Washington ignores this problem and puts its head in the sand is a day closer to the time when the government is going to have to start breaking promises to seniors.
And I know we'll get to another question. He answered what I said, but a lot of people say that, so you're never showing where you're cutting anything. Nobody ever shows where they're cutting anything. The budget we passed did, and I was sitting there 2 years ago when we were, 2 years ago when we were trying to decide, are we going to try to show a budget that balances within the budget window? And to do that, you have to deal with healthcare spending. It's a fact. It's just healthcare spending, Medicare, Medicaid, and the new healthcare law. And a lot of people say, oh, that's the third well of American politics, you said it. And so we have shown where we'll do it. And it does reform, well, we block grant Medicaid, which I'm not sure we could get that through the Senate, but we have to have reforms in the Medicaid program. It's expanding now. And all that bill's coming from the federal government for the short term. And so we have put that into a budget. It balances within 10 years. I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee. A guy named Henry Waxman, you may have heard of, is our ranking member on the Democrat leader of that. And about every time we start a committee, he goes through a list of people that will be affected by the Ryan budget, just to kind of prove a point. Now we're going to have to talk about this or the other. But we put it on the table, actually. And the reason the Senate budget never balances, or the president's budget never even, used to you would pretend to balance in 40 years with some kind of gimmickry. You can't even do that now unless you're willing to look at healthcare spending. And they've been unwilling to put anything on the table that deals with healthcare spending because it's such a popular thing to use against us. But if you're not adults and you don't put that on if you say if I'm unwilling to deal with healthcare spending, you cannot. Yeah, absolutely. The numbers aren't there to balance to get the budget. And so we have a document that we've been sharply criticized over that does what you said, because you can't do it by corporate jets. That's just not enough money there. There's just not. Or you can't do it by raising taxes on the top 2% because there's not enough money there to fund the whole. If they paid 100% tax and still went to work, you wouldn't solve the deficit problem.
Let's get one more question. Larry had his hand up. Two things. It always worries me when I hear that the government is here to help. Murphy's Law says that if you try to fix something that's broken, it's going to get worse. And when I hear somebody say that they're going to try to fix Obamacare, it's only going to get worse, because somebody has to write it, and everybody has a finger in the game, and they're going to write it the way that it benefits them. it almost seems like you have to get rid of it totally and then start over again. I believe that if you just delay it, the government is going to continue to implement it. They will get all the people in place in all of the states, all of the bureaucracy will already be there, and they're going to continue hiring the IRS agents that are going to enforce all of this. And they'll make them do something else, but the minute that you say, okay, we're going to start this now, they'll already be in place. You got to end it up front. That's my personal opinion. I forgot what I was going to ask now. Sorry.
That's all right.
I agree.
And when I said delay, the delay's a full delay of the whole bill where none of it's implemented. The defund side of it, which may be an opportunity to go, only delays the spending part of the bill. And so all of the other, because it's just the taxes and so forth go forward. And it's a one-year delay too, because it's a one-year spending bill. So I just think you get more ability to, when I say delay, and rewrite. The bill is so intricate that anytime you look at how to fix it, because we debated when it first came out and we took the majority, I was there in 2010, do we sit down and try to fix it? Every time you look at trying to fix it, it's like the Papa-Mo thing. It just something else pops up. And the reason the president delayed the employer mandate, because there is no way to enforce it. I mean, every employer has to provide to the IRS, every employee, the level of health care they have. It's just a monstrosity, and there's no system that's in place that can accommodate it. And that's why I delayed it.
Well, I see another question, Perry, if you want to come up and talk with them about that. I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. We are at 9 o'clock, so they can get back to work. But before we go, let's show Carmen. Appreciate it.